Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Kratz. I am thrilled you are here with us today. Our purpose is to share stories, ideas, and tools to help you on your diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. Let's meet this week's guest. Hello, listeners. We have a special guest this week, Genevieve Leveille. Yes, I've been practicing my French a bit, and it's really great to have her here. For over 25 years, she has been a leader in the finance, supply chain optimization, and technology ecosystem. And nowadays, she is recognized most as CEO and principal founder of AgriLedger. And she continues to contribute to the realms of digital identity and financial transformation. She is doing a lot of amazing things, being mentioned in Financial Times, Computer Weekly, has also been recognized as one of the most influential women in UK technology. And she joins us today to talk about the role of diversity in technology in the future and a whole bunch more. So Genevieve, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Julie.
Well, tell us how you got your career started. It's quite a journey I'm sure you've been through in getting to this space. Love to hear more about your story.
Yeah, sure. I actually think that it's curiosity more than anything else, and also, in a way, loving new shiny things and trying to dismantle it. So it goes back to the fact that I am actually a scientist, did biochemistry, and because I had the gift of the gab, also did comparative literature, so I'd have something to talk about instead of just the tech. And that led me to working in healthcare, which is not something most people know, but I actually worked in research for both beta-lactamase, which is basically big drugs that you need when you're in the hospital so that you don't get infection. And then the one that really was dear to my heart was working on Taxol. So that was new and shiny at the time in terms of being able to come up. So we liked, we've been thinking, oh, it was so fast for the COVID to happen, the COVID vaccine. Actually, in the 90s, early 90s, I worked on Taxol, which is tamoxifen, which was a drug administered for women with ovarian cancer, and now it's also administered to those with breast cancer. And because many of these women were at end of term, unfortunately, it was sort of okay to try, and they wanted to be able to provide for the next. And this is coming from the U tree. So that took me through a journey where every time I've worked even in finance, I'm seeing things in the dark that are going to help us get to the light. And it's been putting new systems in, new treasury system, new ERP system, and really getting everyone in the corporate ecosystem to participate in saying what is it that they need, what is it that they expect, and what is it that they're willing to give up on, because I think that's very important. That's the most important. What is it that you really don't need? So when after a very good career and long career working with organization where I felt in reality I was the entrepreneur, I went to work for Identrust, which was amazing because it allowed me to use that skill that I had around networking to sort of bring this product, which was a pretty old product, identity management, into more the corporate world. And that's how I fell into blockchain. And for me, it was like, wow, unfortunately, I didn't get into coins. And I say unfortunately because I could have had some really nice coins, but it wasn't my interest. My interest was, how do you create straight through processing, which means how do you remove those who don't add value to the conversation, to the events, and create the mechanism for those who are needed and that can be a service provider, to actually support one another and create and build greater trust among each other.
Yeah, when I think about the industries you worked in, healthcare, financial, currencies, technology, there's disparate outcomes for folks that are more marginalized and underrepresented. Those communities tend to be underserved. And I wonder, when you think about creating value, like you said, and ensuring that the system is maximizing that value, how do we keep in mind how that affects and over often affects those that are most marginalized? How do we make sure their voices are heard?
This is something where I think it requires what is almost called storytelling. And it requires us to, as technologists, not to take the answers based on our own experience. It is good to have our own experience because we can then glean at where the challenges may be. But this whole concept of conversation with those who are part of the ecosystem is necessary. And mostly when we look at, one of the biggest worries I have right now, it's not around financial inclusion. I'm actually much more every day getting worried about digital inclusion. So if you don't have the digital, you're actually going to end up having a higher cost for anything you need to have. When we look at the proliferation of what is being called central bank digital currency, which is let's think of it cryptographically signed currency by central bank for better distribution of access to cash. Now, many of these things have a premise that you will need to have a phone, a smartphone. We build with this idea that you're going to have that, but we don't even need to go into what I call the Greater South, places like Haiti, where you have abject poverty. You need to just go in New York to a certain neighborhood in the Bronx, where somebody may actually have to have what we call a burner phone, a feature phone, because they cannot afford to buy a smartphone. They cannot afford the data that is required. So that person is actually marginalized from being even getting access to a bank account because their bank is going to say, you need to have a digital presence to be able to see your bank account with us. Because now we've moved very much to where there is a requirement to do things online. It's no longer a nice to have, it's a must have if you want your services. So we don't need to go far to realize the marginalization that we're creating. And also, because of all, we never get to see very great news. We gravitate or we create more sensationalism with bad news or bad events. So if you look at digital wallet or even banking, I have a friend who refuses to use digital banking because she was attacked, fraudulent attack 3 times. That's really bad luck. But that's what gets told, and not told to her how to keep safe and what needs to be safe, or the systems are not created to be safe.
Yeah.
So
Well, and it highlights trust, like you said, the
yes,
lack of trust in these systems that have not worked for all people for a long time. And when you think about systemic bias in the financial systems and healthcare systems, with technology especially, you're right, those stories, especially if they're heard, can create, multiple times, can create a lot of fear for folks that are used to being taken advantage of by the systems that they've learned not to trust. I wonder, Genevieve, how do we disrupt that? Systems work is something I'm really passionate about in the diversity space, and It's also really overwhelming, but as somebody that's worked within these systems, how do we reestablish trust?
So for me, one of the things, so I'm going to say how I do, which actually I will tell the truth also creates a bunch of stress for me, which is to be out there as an example of a woman of color who is not in the marketing space, the legal space. And I applaud all my sisters who do that because they know more than I do. I wouldn't be able to do their job. But what I'm able to do is to look on how to build things and how to create. And I think that we need the next generation to feel enabled and capable to dare to go and build. We also need to make sure that we create the financial systems to support that. So, one of the challenges I have right now that I feel is you don't get enough money to do what is needed. But you sit down and you look at the spring, summer, where and bless his soul, Adam Newman, I'm sure, is very good at doing what he does. But this man got 75 million and then he got 324 million for his fluorocarbon and flow. That will give him the money to build what is necessary. But one of the challenges was that this was more than 50% over what Black founders and women got. So, not together, but separately, got in the first 2 quarters of the year. When you give somebody small money, you make them make choices as to what they can deliver or cannot deliver. So, which means their impact and their access to market and their ability to deliver are not there. So, we need to attack this from many fronts. We do need to look at the educational aspect, the empowerment aspect to sort of say, I'm worthy, I can do that. Making sure from an educational standpoint, not only that people understand the future, and it doesn't need to be around blockchain. I'm just even thinking of things like AI and machine learning and IoT, so mechanical engineering, getting more of the underserved and underrepresented community to go there so that they can actually also reap the rewards of those organizations. And I'm going to say something to you. Actually, when I was in university, my parents, my mother was saying to me, "You're smart, girl. You should go to med school." That's why I ended up in healthcare for a while. And I decided, no, I don't want to go to med school. But I did do an MCAT and everything else. And at one point, I rebelled. And I went and said, I'm going to do literature as my degree. And then as I was looking, I realized, well, if I go to literature, when I graduate, I'm going to make 15,000 and I'm going to be somebody's secretary. I'm going to be going into a magazine. And some of my friends who did that now, they're big publishers, but it was starting versus, oh, I do sciences. I'm going to start with a $25,000 a year salary, and I can make a lot more money as time goes by. And those are things that we need to make sure people understand so that they can understand their choices and understand how to be supported through that, which then allows them to be empowered. For us to build, we need to build for communities, not, we hear about how there is bias in technology. Of course, there's bias. I'm going to build for what I understand, mostly when the rewards are very much about doing fast and loose with what you understand. So,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what gets rewarded is the speed being the first to market, which usually means for a lot of developers of technology that tend to be more dominant groups. You're leaving out women, people of color, folks from other marginalized identities. And that's really problematic when, as you know, AI and technology is really how work will be done in the future, how a lot of things will be done in the future. One of the statistics I've heard recently was just, when you think about frontline jobs in particular, and here in the United States, just from that perspective, a lot of frontline, jobs, whether it's manufacturing, line workers, fast food, workers, drivers, even, a lot of those jobs are going to be replaced by technology. I mean, you can see that happen when you go to order fast food at McDonald's. Now there's a machine to order it from instead of a person. And not that all those jobs are going away with automation, but when you think about the cyclical effect of that there's going to be, you're not going to be represented in the technology, and then it may even replace those lower wage jobs that people in more marginalized communities rely on. So lots of systems work here, Genevieve.
And I think that this is when we need to train those kids to become a mechanical engineer, because what I agree that work is going to change. And this is where, before, it's changed a little bit. Maybe it's because of the space I'm in. I now hear Web3, 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 which I think is a marketing gimmick in some ways, has some validity to it and can be somewhat explained in terms of interaction. But what I liked better was not that I liked the idea of it, but the Industrial Revolution 4, Fourth Industrial Revolution, or IR4, which is really about bringing all these technologies to interact with each other toward changing how we do work. And we can see it already, as you say, the automation, the AI, all coming in together. IoTs are replacing the interaction of humans. However, unless we want rage of the machine and everything breaks down, somebody's got to repair it. So we need to start the training of the youth, or the retraining of those who are already in there, and get them away from being scared. Because let's think about it. It must have been the same way when the first automobiles came out. And then they realized there needs to be a mechanic. So we created these jobs of mechanics, and we need to do the same. We need the software engineers. We need the mechanical engineer. Maybe we don't need them to have master's or even more than a 2-year degree, or even be trained. And we, as people who care about the diversity and inclusion, need to sit at the table and figure out how do we bring them in sooner rather than later. Because some of what we're seeing in the world right now, I think, are the results of these changes. I mean, this morning, waking up in the UK, where I am this week, you hear for the first time, the pound is at parity to the dollar. I like that for my payments and coming in dollars for what I have to
Yeah,
spend in the
which side
UK.
you're on, if that's a good thing or not. But it is unusual. Yeah.
And however, you can imagine the discountant is going to do, the level of job loss is going to happen. And we are going into winter. It is going to be about people not having access to the bare necessities that they need, such as food and heat, maybe, electricity, which then is going to create discontent. And what is that going to do? And I see that becoming even a bigger issue, and we're going to see huge job losses. We knew the recession was coming, but it's slamming in a way that was not expected.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the R word, the recession, here it is, late 2022 and going into 2023, thinking about how economic recession, so we saw this with COVID, right? It more deeply affects frontline workers and more marginalized communities, as it always does. And The thing that I think we've learned over the last few years is that the wealthy are getting wealthier, the middle class is
Hmm.
getting smaller, and the poor are getting poorer. Like, it doesn't feel sustainable. Like, this feels like a recipe for disaster to not have, a strong middle class, and really just frankly people sharing resources with each other. When you have people starving and people, with such abundance, it feels very wrong. And not that you have a magic wand, Genevieve, but if you did, for the average listener listening to our podcast, they might be scratching their head thinking, like, these are big problems. Like, I don't know what my role in this is. I feel overwhelmed myself. I'm like, I'm not doing enough to support this. What are some practical things that people can do to be on the good side of this, to make sure that these outcomes don't negatively affect more of our diverse marginalized groups?
My point of view is talking about it. It's these kind of conversation, having the difficult conversation, having the difficult view. Now, in the realm of corporate, or let's say those who are in organization, you may not be able to sort of provide a paid job, but is it about creating more internships with the view of providing opportunities to these youngsters that are coming in? So we're going to be in 2 years, in my point of view, in a 2 years crunch. Wouldn't it be great to have the next workers coming in be prepared? And I think that for me, though, I've always thought it's not only about the mechanics, it's the how. It's supporting them through, I had a conversation a few months back around that subject, and I said, doing an internship where you're just basically rating somebody on their work is not enough, mostly for these communities, some of those communities. You may have, this was in England, so we were talking about you could have a child, a youngster coming in from a Muslim household who knows what he cannot have and doesn't drink, but doesn't understand you can go into a bar and have a soda and still have conversation and interactions. How do they go into a restaurant and have order what they need without creating any kind of embarrassment to themselves because of nervousness? And that's something that can be done. So I think that for those of us who will be lucky enough to be still employed or less stressed about the effect of the big R, is to then give back time to mentor, to provide support, and to help somebody be ready for when, because these things are cyclical. I hope, as predicted by many economists, that it's a 2 year crunch and that it's not longer. And that by the time we come out of this, we have prepared those who need to be. So unlike the third industrial revolution, where it took 100 years for people to get out of poverty, we shorten the time that they will have to spend in this space.
Yeah, I like the idea of getting more creative with upskilling workers and use the engineering example. And I think we've overvalued, this long, development education, that perhaps we could, get more creative on how to upskill workers and hope, yeah, that the 2 year perhaps downturn or recession or whatever we want to call it on the other side of this, that it's not as deep, the effects, and that we've learned to include people in the conversation, much like you gave that example of, I think about getting to know your coworkers, not making assumptions about, yeah, like drinking in your example, and just broadening your lens to folks that are different from you and learning from their stories, like you said, and helping to repair trust in places that it may have been violated and broken over the years. Not that maybe us as individuals did that, but recognizing that others have.
Mhm.
Genevieve, it has been so fun to talk with you today. So many great nuggets and themes here. I appreciate the work you're doing. Tell our listeners, how can they connect with you and follow your work more?
I am on every platform as MG Leveille, and also my company is at AgriLedger. Um, so that's, so LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, all of those, and Instagram also, even though I'm not very good on that one. But it's been such a pleasure, and I really hope that I feel it's a little somber because this morning it's kind of rainy here, and in London it's been gray. But I do have lots of hope. I have hope for us as humanity that we will do what is right, and also that because we recognize that the challenge that we will do what's necessary, and now we have the ability to communicate much more openly and make a difference.
I do too. Hope is important. And like you said, continuing the conversation. So thanks so much, Genevieve, for your voice today. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. So thankful for you sharing your story.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Allies are necessary for positive change. If you are on the journey to becoming an ally, we invite you to participate in our brand new Lead Like an Ally online program, or get a copy of our new book, Allyship in Action, available on Amazon. Both are helpful tools that meet leaders where they're at and help provide tools for professional and personal settings. Head over to nextpivotpoint.com to get started today.